I wonder how many people hated each other because they couldn't agree on something in the pull request. When I just started programming, I was obsessed with clean code. It gave me some certainty while I was surrounded by different uncertainties. I had no idea how to deploy my code, why my code was working, why my code was not working. And knowing that I should keep my functions small and give my variables meaningful names, it gave me some comfort. But as years went by and I got more experience and I got to work on different projects of different sizes and complexities, I started to realize that not all of the concepts of a clean code actually work for me all the time. In this video, I want to highlight some of the principles that do not always work for me. I want to give you a few things that I focus on instead. Let's get into it. I'm going to start with the most obvious of them all, the Boy Scout rule. Leave the place better than you found it, right? Not all the time. It is a great rule for small projects or maybe the projects that you build from the ground up. But for most work projects that are sometimes huge legacy complex systems, it may lead to a very unwanted side effects. And in this case, you might want to do your feature and the refactoring separately, even if it leads to the duplication of code or a violation of a clean code principles. You do the feature, you test the feature. You do the refactoring, you test the refactoring. Otherwise, it may lead to very unwanted side effects and a lot of rollbacks. The second area where clean code doesn't work for me is prototypes or proof of concept. Apart from some very trivial things that are becoming a habit, I'm trying to keep my POCs as small as possible. Most probably it's going to be the code that's going to be thrown away in a day, and I wouldn't want to spend more time than necessary on it. Especially if it's a prototype for a feature in the existing project and you're trying to follow the folder structure to make the interface-based implementations. And you're creating a lot of classes just to throw everything away tomorrow or redo everything completely because your POC didn't work. I think it's quite a waste of time. The third thing is creating constants for everything. You may have seen it a lot, especially if you're using tools like Sonar for your project. You have the magic numbers, you have the literals, and you're supposed to create constants with good naming so people understand what the literals or magic numbers are about. And you're doing it for discoverability, for usability, and all other ility words. But in reality, if you create too many constants, you're going to be lost in the sea of constants. And that does not help discoverability at all. So sometimes I leave the literals be. If they're used once, if they're not very important in the rest of the project, let it be. Not everything has to be a constant. And speaking of meaningful names, in most of the cases, it's a very good rule of thumb. Give your variable a name so you know what you're dealing with. Kind of makes sense, right? But sometimes, especially if you're writing in a functional style, long meaningful names can make it worse. For example, in Kotlin, you can have a code like this that does not really look complicated at all, no matter which variables are used. But if you look at the same functionality but written in Python as list comprehension, using longer names actually makes it less readable. And using short variables close to mathematical notations can be actually more beneficial. And the last thing that I want to highlight is that there is no prefer clean code style. Of course, there are guides for every language, but they seem to differ a lot between companies. There are different people working in the companies with different backgrounds. Usually, those are people coming from different languages and they are bringing their experience with them, for better or for worse. And instead of following some generic clean code principles, I very often end up following current companies' code principles or even current projects. So what do I focus on instead? First of all, for every project I'm working on, I'm trying to make sure that there is some kind of automatic check style. This helps to focus the attention of people in the pull request reviews from an empty string to an actual logical problems that may be there. I wonder how many people hated each other because they couldn't agree on something in the pull request. Since a lot of things can be automated, I treat everything that's not checked automatically as a personal preference, and it helps a lot to work with the team. The other thing I'm paying a lot of attention to is the structure of my project. My favorite thing is to separate everything into 3 parts: the incoming external dependencies, the domain logic or the internals, and the outcoming external dependencies. The first layer is responsible for handling stuff that is being sent to the server and mapping it into the way that's understandable for the second layer, the domain logic. And the third layer is any connection to a third-party system that the server makes, sending notifications, or calling another service, or databases. This structure provides a good mental model. It's easier to test the domain logic, and it's very easy to swap everything except for domain logic. So I got the check styles out of the way, I'm working on the domain logic, I'm focusing on my problem, but how do I arrange my classes? This is the time to remember about single responsibility principle. I think it's one of the most known and most underutilized principles of all times. It's very easy to focus on small building blocks like functions and namings and forget about the classes themselves. Write your classes the way that they can be reused by another person for another feature without a history lesson. Or let's be realistic, just add docs. I know that I've complained about using too many constants before, but there is one area when I am military about externalizing the variables, and this is the configuration. I think externalizing configuration can help so much, even with small projects, but especially with the project that will be deployed to multiple environments. It doesn't really matter where my configuration is. Based on the project, it can be an application configuration that's picked up during the deployment, or it can be a storage configuration that can be hot swapped. This is not that important. The important thing is that I never store configuration in the code if I can avoid it, and it saved me a lot of nerve cells. So those were my principles. I hope it was useful in some way or another, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.